Welcome to Fairfax Docks. Tonight, we're diving into Louisiana's Bayou to Bellemont. When darkness takes root, it spreads, echoes, and waits. Bellemont, with 8,400 people, looks like any southern town: Creole cottages, live oaks, and bayonets. But locals avoid the Beauregard ruins, parts of Bayou Noir, and St. Catherine's Cemetery after dark. When asked why, they simply say, "Don't go near the Beauregard land after sunset." Tonight, I'll share 5 true stories, 5 people who ignored these warnings, ghost hunters, photographers, and explorers, venturing into what should live in ordinary places. But in Bellemont, nothing is ordinary after dark. These stories are connected. By the end, you'll understand. Some debts are never paid, and some places should be left alone. Jessica Chen was 32 years old in the summer of 2019, and she'd been investigating paranormal activity for 7 years, not as a hobby, as a serious researcher. She had a master's degree in folklore studies from LSU, her own YouTube channel with 120,000 subscribers, and professional-grade equipment: thermal cameras, EMF detectors, spirit boxes, the works. Jessica specialized in Southern Gothic locations, plantations, Civil War battlefields, historic cemeteries, places where trauma had soaked into the land like blood into soil. She'd investigated over 50 sites across Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, and while she'd captured some interesting evidence, she'd never encountered anything she couldn't explain or handle. That confidence would prove to be her downfall. In late July, Jessica received a message through her website from someone who identified themselves only as M. The message was brief: "My family owns the Beauregard Plantation ruins in Bellemont. If you're serious about paranormal investigation, this is your chance. No one has investigated this site in 40 years. Jessica researched the location immediately. The Beauregard Plantation had a fascinating and disturbing history: the 1847 disappearance of 37 people, the owner's mysterious madness, rumors of voodoo rituals. It was exactly the kind of high-profile investigation that could take her channel to the next level. She replied to the message, "I'm interested." The response came within minutes: "Tonight, sunset, come alone." Jessica should have found that strange. Professional investigators never work alone, especially at an unfamiliar site. But she was excited, eager, and perhaps a bit arrogant. She'd handled dozens of investigations. What could go wrong? She drove to Bellemont that afternoon, arriving around 5 p.m. The town itself was charming in a decaying sort of way. Beautiful old architecture slowly succumbing to humidity and time. She stopped at a local cafe for coffee and asked the owner about the Beauregard ruins. The woman's face went pale. "I'm doing a paranormal investigation," Jessica explained. "The Beauregards haven't owned that land in 70 years, the cafe owner said slowly. "Town bought it in 1953, tried to develop it. Nothing ever takes. Contractors refuse to work there. Last person who tried to build on that land disappeared." Jessica felt a chill, despite the oppressive Louisiana heat. "I received a message from someone claiming to be M." The cafe owner shook her head. "Don't go out there, please, especially not after dark. The land, it calls to people, and sometimes people answer." She didn't finish the sentence, but Jessica had driven 4 hours for this investigation. She wasn't going to turn back because of local superstitions. She thanked the woman for the coffee and left. Act 2. First encounter. Jessica arrived at the Beauregard ruins just before sunset. The property was exactly as described in historical records: 12 acres of overgrown gardens surrounded by ancient live oak trees draped in Spanish moss. The main house had burned, but you could still see the foundation, blackened brick and broken columns poking up through decades of vegetation. It was beautiful in a haunting way, atmospheric, perfect for filming. Jessica set up her equipment as the sun began to set. She placed thermal cameras at strategic points around the property, positioned her audio recorders to catch EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, and calibrated her EMF detector to scan for electromagnetic field fluctuations. By the time she finished setting up, it was fully dark. The cicadas were deafening, and the humidity made every breath feel thick and heavy. Jessica turned on her handheld camera and began her standard opening. "This is Jessica Chen, and tonight I'm at the Beauregard Plantation ruins in Bellemont, Louisiana. This location has a dark history dating back to 1847, when her EMF detector suddenly spiked, emitting a high-pitched whine. Jessica stopped talking and looked at the device. The readings were off the charts. higher than anything she'd ever recorded, and they were coming from a specific direction, deeper into the property, toward what had once been the slave quarters. "Okay," Jessica said to her camera, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We're getting extremely high EMF readings." She walked toward the source, her equipment in one hand, flashlight in the other. The slave quarter foundations were barely visible beneath the vegetation, just low brick walls, most of them collapsed. Jessica's EMF detector was screaming now, the readings fluctuating wildly. Then she saw it, a figure standing among the ruins. Jessica froze, her breath catching. The figure was a woman, wearing what looked like a long white dress. She was standing perfectly still, facing away from Jessica, her long dark hair hanging loose down her back. Jessica called out, "Are you Monsieur Beauregard? I'm Jessica Chen. I'm here to investigate." The woman didn't move, didn't respond. Jessica's EMF detector went silent, completely dead. She looked down at the device. The battery indicator showed it was fully charged, but it had stopped functioning entirely. When she looked up, the woman was gone. Act 3, Escalation. Jessica's hands were shaking as she checked her other equipment. Her thermal camera had captured the woman, but the thermal signature was wrong. Instead of showing body heat, the figure registered as cold, colder than the surrounding environment, colder than anything living should be. "This is incredible," Jessica whispered to her handheld camera. "I just captured what appears to be a full-body apparition with an inverse thermal signature. This is—" A voice interrupted her. Jessica spun around, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Who's there? M." "You were warned," the voice continued. It was female with a strange accent Jessica couldn't quite place. Something old, pre-Civil War perhaps. "The woman at the cafe told you not to come." "I'm a paranormal researcher," Jessica said, trying to keep her voice steady. The voice laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're here because you were called." Jessica's throat went dry. "Your presence, your energy." The temperature dropped suddenly, 20 degrees in seconds. Jessica could see her breath now, white puffs in the flashlight beam. Around her, the ruins began to change. At first, Jessica thought it was a trick of the light, but as she watched, the collapsed walls began to rebuild themselves. Bricks rose from the ground, stacking themselves, forming structures that hadn't existed for 170 years. Within moments, Jessica was standing in the middle of a fully intact slave quarter, exactly as it had looked in 1847. And she wasn't alone. Figures began to appear, dozens of them, men, women, children, all wearing clothing from the 1840s, all staring at Jessica with hollow, empty eyes. "This isn't possible," Jessica whispered, backing away. This is a mass hallucination, environmental factors causing, always rationalizing," the woman's voice said. The figure in white appeared again, now standing directly in front of Jessica, close enough to touch. Jessica could see the woman's face now, and she immediately wished she couldn't. The face was beautiful but wrong. Skin too pale, eyes completely black, mouth fixed in a smile that never reached those dead eyes. "I'm Amélie Beauregard," the woman said. "Henri's wife, the one they called a witch." "You're not real," Jessica said, but her voice cracked with fear. "You're a projection, a psychological—" "Touch me," Amélie said, extending her hand. "Go ahead." Act 4, Climax. Jessica didn't touch her. Instead, she turned and ran. Behind her, she heard laughter, not just Amélie's voice, but dozens of voices, all laughing in unison. The reconstructed slave quarters dissolved back into ruins as Jessica sprinted through them, her equipment forgotten, her only thought to reach her car and get away from this cursed place. But the property had changed. The path she'd walked earlier was gone. The trees seemed to move, blocking her way, forcing her deeper into the ruins instead of toward the entrance. Jessica's flashlight flickered and died, leaving her in darkness broken only by pale moonlight filtering through Spanish moss. She stumbled over something and fell hard, her hands sinking into soft earth. When she pulled them back, they were covered in something dark and wet. In the moonlight, it looked like blood. "You can't leave," Amélie's voice whispered, now coming from directly behind her. "No one leaves. That's the price Henri paid. That's the debt that must be honored. Every few years, the land takes someone." 37 souls were bound here. Jessica scrambled to her feet and kept running. She could see her car now, maybe 50 yards away, parked where she'd left it near the entrance. So close, the ground beneath her feet suddenly gave way. Jessica plunged downward, falling through what felt like soft earth but couldn't be. She'd been running on solid ground seconds before. She fell 10, 15 feet, landing hard on stone. When Jessica opened her eyes, she was in a cellar, the foundation of the burned house. And she wasn't alone. The 37 figures surrounded her, pressing in from all sides. Their empty eyes stared at her. Their mouths moved in unison, whispering something in French that Jessica couldn't understand. Amélie appeared in the center of the circle, floating a few inches above the ground. Henri bound them here, trapped them. They can't leave. They can't rest. No, Jessica whispered. Please, I didn't know. I'll leave. Oh, you'll leave, Amélie said with that horrible smile. But something will stay behind. That's how it works. We take a piece of you, a piece of your soul. She gestured to the figures surrounding them. Act 5. Resolution and Aftermath. Jessica woke up in her car. It was dawn. Birds were singing. The oppressive atmosphere of the night before had lifted. She had no memory of how she'd gotten back to her car. The last thing she remembered was the cellar, the figures, Amélie's voice. Then, nothing. Jessica checked her equipment. Every device was dead, batteries drained, memory cards corrupted, hours of footage, dozens of recordings all gone. It was as if the night's events had been erased, but Jessica knew what she'd experienced. And as she drove away from Bellemont, she noticed something wrong. In her rearview mirror, her reflection looked different, paler. The eyes looked darker, almost black in certain light. She made it back to Baton Rouge, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed her home. Shadows seemed darker in her apartment. Sounds that shouldn't be there echoed through empty rooms. And at night, when she tried to sleep, she heard whispering in French. Jessica deleted her YouTube channel 3 weeks later. She stopped all paranormal investigations. She moved to a different state, changed her phone number, tried to forget. But 6 months after her visit to the Beauregard ruins, Jessica received a message through her old email account. The sender was listed as me. The message contained just one line: "Thank you for your donation." Jessica never responded, but she knows what that message means. She gave something to the land that night, a piece of herself that can never be reclaimed. And in return, one of those 37 souls was released to whatever comes next. The debt is still being paid, the balance maintained, and the land waits for the next person foolish enough to ignore the warnings. Jessica still lives with the consequences. Some nights, she wakes up speaking French, a language she never learned. Sometimes she catches her reflection doing things she isn't doing, moving in ways she isn't moving. The piece of her that was taken is still there, still bound to that cursed land, and she knows that eventually the land will call her back to collect the rest. If you're a paranormal investigator, if you chase ghosts and seek out haunted locations, remember this: some places don't want to be investigated, some spirits don't want to be documented, and some debts can never be paid. They just get passed on to the next person foolish enough to answer the call. The Beauregard ruins are still there, still waiting, still calling to people who think they're brave enough, smart enough, prepared enough. They're not. Dr. Michael Torres was 46 years old and had spent the last 20 years of his life studying the history of slavery in the American South. He was a tenured professor at Tulane University, the author of 3 well-received books, and he was working on what he hoped would be his magnum opus, a comprehensive study of Louisiana plantation systems from 1820 to 1860. Michael's research was meticulous. He didn't just rely on published sources. He traveled to small towns across Louisiana, digging through local archives, reading personal letters, examining property records. He wanted to tell the complete story, including the voices of those who'd been enslaved and silenced. In September of 2021, Michael's research led him to Bellemont. He'd found references to the Beauregard Plantation in several historical documents, but the story was always incomplete. The 1847 disappearance was mentioned, but details were vague, contradictory. Most disturbing, after 1847, all records of the Beauregard Plantation simply stopped. No sale records, no property transfers, nothing. It was as if historians had collectively decided to forget the place existed. Michael contacted the Bellemont Public Library, which housed the local historical archives. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Thibodeau, told him they had materials on the Beauregard family but warned him, "Nobody's looked at those files in 40 years, Professor," Michael had asked. Mrs. Thibodeau's response was cryptic. "Some history is better left buried, but if you insist on digging it up, I can't stop you. Just don't stay after dark. The library closes at 5 p.m. sharp." Michael assured her he'd respect the library's hours and drove to Bellemont the following week. The public library was housed in the old parish courthouse, a beautiful Greek Revival building from 1855. What Michael didn't know, what Mrs. Thibodeau hadn't mentioned, was that the courthouse had been built on land originally owned by Henry Beauregard. Act 2. First Encounter. Michael arrived at the library at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Mrs. Thibodeau met him at the door, her expression wary but polite. She led him to the archives room on the second floor, a dusty, climate-controlled space filled with filing cabinets and storage boxes. "The Beauregard materials are in the corner," she said, pointing to a section that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything. Remember, 5 p.m. Michael spent the morning going through property records and business ledgers. The Beauregard Plantation had been massive, over 2,000 acres, producing 500,000 pounds of sugar annually. Henry Beauregard had been one of the wealthiest men in Louisiana, but it was the personal documents that caught Michael's attention. Letters, diary entries, household accounts, and as he read, a disturbing picture emerged. Henry Beauregard had become obsessed with immortality in the years leading up to 1847. His diary entries mentioned consultations with a woman he called the Wise One who lived in the swamps. He wrote about rituals, sacrifices, the binding of souls. Michael was fascinated. This was exactly the kind of primary source material that could make his book groundbreaking. He photographed every page, taking detailed notes. Around 3 p.m., Michael found something that made his blood run cold. It was a ledger dated August 14th, 1847, one day before the mass disappearance. The entry read, "Prepare the 37 for the ceremony. All have been marked. Tomorrow night, when the moon is dark, I will complete what was begun. Immortality will be mine." The next entry, dated August 18th, was in a different handwriting, shaky, barely legible. "They're still here, all of them. I can hear them at night. They won't let me leave." That was the last entry Henry Beauregard ever made. Michael was so absorbed in the documents that he didn't notice the time. When he finally looked at his watch, it was 5:15 p.m. The library was supposed to close at 5 o'clock. He gathered his materials quickly and headed downstairs. The lights in the stairwell flickered as he descended. When Michael reached the main floor, the library was dark, empty. "Mrs." he called out. His voice echoed in the empty building. No response. Michael tried the front door, locked. He pulled out his phone to call someone, but he had no signal. The thick walls of the old courthouse blocked reception. "Great," Michael muttered. He'd have to find another way out. Act 3, Escalation. As Michael walked through the darkened library, looking for another exit, he began to notice things that didn't make sense. Books were opened on tables, pages turned to specific entries, all relating to the Beauregard Plantation. Michael hadn't left any computers on. He was certain of it. He continued toward the back of the building, where he remembered seeing an emergency exit, but the library seemed different now, longer. The aisles of bookshelves stretched further than they should. The architecture didn't match what he'd seen that morning. Then Michael heard it. Footsteps upstairs. In the archives room. Someone was walking slowly across the wooden floor, each step deliberate and measured. "Mrs. B," Michael called up the stairs. "Is someone there? I got locked in and I need—" The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, there was absolute silence. Then all the books in the nearest shelf flew out simultaneously, landing at Michael's feet. He stumbled backward, his heart hammering. This wasn't possible. There was no wind, no earthquake, nothing that could explain. More books flew from the shelves, dozens of them, hundreds. They didn't fall randomly. They arranged themselves on the floor in patterns. Letters, words. Michael whispered. The temperature dropped suddenly. Michael could see his breath now, white puffs in the darkness, and in that moment, he understood. Whatever had happened at the Beauregard Plantation, whatever Henry had done, it wasn't confined to those ruins. It had spread into the town, into this building, built on Beauregard land. A voice echoed through the estuary. Male, cultured, once with a French accent. "You seek to know my story, Professor? You wish to document my shame? Very well." Act 4, Climax. The library transformed around Michael. The modern fixtures dissolved like mist, replaced by the interior of a 19th century courthouse. Gas lamps appeared on the walls, wooden furniture materialized, and people, dozens of people in period clothing, filled the space. Michael recognized the central figure immediately from portraits he'd seen in the archives, Henri Beauregard. He was standing at what appeared to be his own trial, though no judges or lawyers were present. Instead, 37 figures surrounded him, men, women, and children in the simple clothing of enslaved workers. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," Henri was saying, his voice desperate. "The ritual was supposed to bind them to the land, yes, but to give them eternal life as well. We would all live forever together. I was going to free them afterward." The 37 figures said nothing. They just stared at Henri with dead, accusing eyes. Henri screamed, "Death is the great equalizer, the great tragedy. I truly believed that by binding us all to this land, we could transcend death itself." One of the figures finally spoke, a woman's voice, the same voice Michael recognized from his earlier research. "Amélie Beauregard, you didn't make us equal, husband. You made us prisoners, forever trapped, forever bound." Henri Beauregard collapsed to his knees. "No, please, Amélie, I beg you. You created this curse," Amélie said coldly. "Now you must live with it." The 37 figures closed in on Henri. Michael couldn't see what happened next, but he heard screaming that went on for far too long. Then the scene shifted. Michael was back in the modern library. But he wasn't alone. Henri Beauregard stood before him, or what was left of him. The man's face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, his skin the color of old parchment. "Now you know, Professor," Henri said. "Now you understand what I did. And because you know, because you've seen, you become part of it, part of the story." Michael tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He looked down and saw why. His feet were sinking into the floor as if the solid wood had turned to mud. The building itself was pulling him down. Michael shouted, "This isn't real!" Henri asked, "Or is this the only real thing you've ever experienced? Everything else, your life, your work, your accomplishments, all of it is temporary, fleeting." He gestured to the library around them. "This is eternal. The curse is eternal." Michael felt himself being pulled deeper. The floor was up to his knees now. In desperation, he grabbed onto a bookshelf, but it crumbled in his hands like ash. "Please," Michael gasped. "I have a family, a daughter. I can't." His expression softened slightly. "I had a family too, Professor. It didn't save me." He paused, considering. "Perhaps there's a way. If you promise never to speak of what you've learned, never to publish your research." Michael said immediately, "Whatever you want." Act 5, Resolution and Aftermath. Michael woke up outside the library at dawn. He was lying on the front steps, his research materials scattered around him. Every page he'd photographed was blank. Every note he'd taken was gone. The only thing that remained was a single sheet of paper with a message written in archaic French script. "Your silence buys your freedom." Michael drove back to New Orleans in a daze. He didn't know what had happened. Hallucination, psychotic break, actual supernatural experience. And he didn't care. All he knew was that he would never ever return to Bellemont. True to his word, Michael never published his research on the Beauregard Plantation. He destroyed all his notes, deleted all his files. When colleagues asked about his magnum opus, he claimed he'd decided to take his research in a different direction. But the curse left its mark. Michael developed a condition his doctors couldn't explain. Every night at exactly 3 a.m., he wakes up speaking fluent French, a language he never studied. And in those moments, he isn't Michael Torres. He's someone else, someone who lived 170 years ago and never truly died. The doctors call it a sleep disorder. Michael knows better. He broke his promise, if only in his dreams, and the curse is slowly claiming what it's owed. 2 years after his experience in Bellemont, Michael received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. Him, standing in the Bellemont Library archives, taken from an angle that showed no one else was in the room. But in the photograph, standing directly behind Michael, was Henri Beauregard. And Henri was smiling. Michael moved to California shortly after, changed his name, stopped teaching, stopped researching. But every year, on August 15th, the anniversary of the original disappearance, he receives another photograph. Each one shows him in his current location, and each one shows Henri Beauregard, standing just a little bit closer. The curse is patient. It can wait. If you're a historian, if you dig through old archives seeking forgotten truths, remember this: some history is buried for a reason. Some stories are meant to stay untold, and some curses don't need you to believe in them to claim you. The Beauregard records are still there, in the Bellemont Library archives, still waiting for the next researcher foolish enough to disturb them. Amanda Reeves was 28 years old and had recently quit her corporate job to pursue nature photography full-time. It was a risky decision, trading a stable income for an uncertain creative career, but Amanda had always felt most alive when she was behind a camera, capturing the beauty of the natural world. Her specialty was abandoned beauty, nature reclaiming human spaces, overgrown gardens, tree roots breaking through old foundations, wildflowers growing in cracked parking lots. That intersection of wild and civilized, decay and rebirth. She'd researched dozens of locations and created an ambitious itinerary, 10 cemeteries in 7 days. One of those cemeteries was St. Catherine's in Bellemont. Amanda's research had turned up some interesting facts about St. Catherine's. Founded in 1792, it was one of the oldest cemeteries in Louisiana. Many prominent families were buried there, including the Beauregards. The cemetery featured elaborate above-ground tombs typical of the region, stunning Victorian-era ironwork, and ancient oak trees that created a cathedral-like atmosphere. What Amanda's research didn't include were the warnings. She didn't know that St. Catherine's had been closed to the public in 2005, after 3 visitors reported similar experiences: graves that seemed to move on their own, names appearing and disappearing from tombstones, and a pervasive feeling that they were being followed by something they couldn't see. The cemetery had officially reopened in 2012, but locals still avoided it, especially the section where the Beauregard family tomb stood. Act T2, First Encounter. Amanda arrived at St. Catherine's around 4 p.m. on a beautiful October afternoon. She grabbed her camera bag and walked through the cemetery gates. The place was stunning. The above-ground tombs, some as large as small buildings, stood in rows like a miniature city of the dead. Live oak trees draped in Spanish moss created gorgeous natural frames. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting dramatic shadows across the weathered stone. Amanda spent the first hour just walking, scouting locations, planning her shots. She photographed ornate ironwork, crumbling angels, names and dates carved into stone. Every image was beautiful, haunting, exactly what she'd hoped for. Then Amanda found the Beauregard family tomb. It was larger than the others, a white marble structure with Corinthian columns and a heavy iron door. The name Beauregard was carved across the top in elegant script. Smaller text below listed the family members interred within: Henri Beauregard, 1801-1848, Amélie Beauregard, 1815-1845, and several others. What caught Amanda's attention wasn't the tomb itself, but the tree growing beside it. An enormous live oak, easily 300 years old, its massive branches spreading out like arms embracing the tomb. The Spanish moss hanging from its branches created an ethereal veil. It was the perfect shot. Amanda set up her camera on a tripod, carefully composing the image, the tomb in the foreground, the ancient tree behind it, golden sunlight filtering through the moss. She took several exposures, bracketing for the perfect lighting. As she was packing up her equipment, Amanda noticed something odd. One of the photos she'd just taken appeared to have something in it that shouldn't be there. A figure standing in the shadows of the tree, partially hidden by Spanish moss. Amanda looked at the tree. No one was there now. She scrolled through the images on her camera's LCD screen. In several photos, she could clearly see a woman in a white dress, standing just behind the tomb, facing the camera. But Amanda had been alone when she took those shots. Completely alone. Must be a trick of the light, Amanda muttered, though she didn't really believe it. Act 3, Escalation. Amanda continued photographing other parts of the cemetery, but she couldn't stop thinking about those images, the figure in white, the way it seemed to be looking directly at the camera. As the sun began to set, Amanda decided to return to the Beauregard tomb for one more series of shots. The lighting would be different now, darker, moodier, perfect for the aesthetic she wanted. But when Amanda arrived back at the Beauregard plot, something had changed. The iron door of the tomb, which had been firmly closed earlier, was now slightly ajar, not fully open, just cracked, enough to see darkness beyond. Amanda approached slowly, her photographer's curiosity overriding her caution. She peered through the gap in the door, trying to see inside. Amanda spun around so fast she nearly dropped her camera. A woman stood there, the same woman from the photographs. Long dark hair, white dress, pale skin, beautiful but unsettling in a way Amanda couldn't quite articulate. "I'm sorry," Amanda stammered. "I didn't hear you approach. I'm a photographer." The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Are you documenting what you see? Look at your camera," the woman said. Amanda looked down at her LCD screen. The most recent image showed the Beauregard tomb with the door open. But standing in the doorway, clearly visible, were 7 figures, 7 pale faces staring out from the darkness. "That's not possible," Amanda whispered. "The door wasn't open When she looked up, the woman was gone, but the tomb door was now fully open, revealing the dark interior, and from inside came voices, multiple voices, whispering in French. Act 4, Climax. Amanda knew she should leave. Every instinct was screaming at her to run, but she'd spent years training herself to capture moments of discomfort, to document things that made people uneasy. That's what made her work powerful. So instead of running, Amanda raised her camera and took a photograph of the tomb's interior. Through the viewfinder, she could see them clearly. 7 figures standing inside the tomb, not skeletons, not ghosts exactly, but something in between. Bodies that had been dead for over 170 years but hadn't quite finished dying. One of them was Henry Beauregard. Amanda recognized him from the portrait she'd seen in her research. He looked just as he had in life, except for his eyes. They were completely black, like pools of oil. "You document the dead," Henry said, his voice echoing from inside the tomb. "I'm leaving," Amanda said, lowering her camera. "Not yet," Henry replied. "First, you must deliver a message to the woman at the tree. Tell her the door is open." Amanda looked at the oak tree beside the tomb. The woman in white stood there now, her back to Amanda, facing away toward the deeper parts of the cemetery. "I don't understand," Amanda said. "My wife," Henry said. "Amélie, she cursed me for what I did, bound me here, in this tomb, with the 6 loyal servants who helped me with the ritual. We've been here ever since, trapped between death and life. I don't want to be part of this," Amanda said, backing away. "Too late," another voice said, Amélie's voice, though her lips didn't move. "You took our photograph. You saw us truly." The ground beneath Amanda's feet began to tremble. Around the cemetery, other tomb doors swung open, dozens of them, and from each one figures emerged, the dead of Bellemont, rising from their resting places. "Run," Amélie said, and now she was standing directly in front of Amanda, close enough to touch. "Run, photographer, and take your images with you." Amanda ran. She didn't look back, didn't stop to see what was happening behind her. She just ran toward the cemetery gates, her camera bouncing against her chest, her heart hammering. Behind her, she could hear them, dozens of footsteps, dozens of voices, all chanting something in French that sounded like a prayer or a curse or both. Act 5, Resolution and Aftermath. Amanda burst through the cemetery gates just as the sun fully set. She kept running to her car, threw her equipment in the back seat, and drove. She didn't stop until she'd left Bellemont city limits. When Amanda finally felt safe enough to pull over and check her camera, she found that every single photograph she'd taken at St. Catherine's was corrupted, distorted. The images were there, but they'd been altered. Faces appeared in places where no faces should be. Shadows moved in ways shadows shouldn't. And in every single shot, somewhere in the frame, was Amélie in her white dress, staring directly at the camera. Amanda deleted all the images, reformatted her memory cards, tried to forget what she'd seen. But 3 days later, Amanda woke up to find her camera had turned itself on during the night. On the LCD screen was a new photograph, one she hadn't taken. It showed her bedroom, taken from the foot of her bed while she slept. And standing in the bedroom doorway, barely visible in the darkness, was Amélie Beauregard. Amanda moved back to Oregon the following week. She sold all her camera equipment and stopped doing photography entirely. She works in an office now, a safe, normal job with no artistic pretensions. But sometimes, when Amanda looks at photographs, any photographs, even ones taken by other people. She sees them, the figures from St. Catherine's Cemetery, the dead of Bellemont, always in the background, always watching, always waiting, and she knows that one day they'll step out of the photographs and into the real world, because she opened the door, she completed the curse, and now she has to live with the consequences. If you're a photographer, if you seek out cemeteries and abandoned places for their beauty and melancholy, remember this: sometimes the things you photograph look back. Sometimes they see you seeing them, and sometimes they follow you home. St. Catherine's Cemetery is still there, gates still open during daylight hours. The Beauregard tomb doors closed again. But if you go there, if you photograph that tomb, check your images carefully. You might capture something you didn't intend to, something that doesn't want to stay captured. Ryan McCarthy was 34 years old and had been geocaching for 8 years. For those unfamiliar with the hobby, geocaching is essentially a worldwide treasure hunt using GPS coordinates. People hide containers, called caches, in interesting locations, then post the coordinates online for others to find. Ryan had found over 2,000 caches across 15 states. He specialized in difficult terrain caches, the ones hidden in remote locations that required hiking, climbing, or kayaking to reach. The harder the cache, the more Ryan enjoyed the challenge. The description was cryptic: find what was lost, claim what was hidden. The coordinates placed the cache near the Bayou boat launch in Bellemont, Louisiana. The difficulty rating was 5.5, the highest possible. The terrain rating was also 5.5, indicating extreme physical challenges. Ryan was intrigued. He researched the area and found references to the Beauregard Plantation and the 1847 disappearance. The cache's name was clearly a reference to that history, which made it even more appealing. Historical caches were Ryan's favorite. What Ryan didn't know was that Beauregard's legacy hadn't been placed by another geocacher. The cache had simply appeared in the database 3 days earlier. No username attached, no previous logs. It existed in the app, but no human had created it. Ryan arrived at the Bayou boat launch on a Saturday morning. The location was remote, a dirt parking area beside a narrow waterway surrounded by dense swamp. A weathered sign warned, "Swim at own risk." According to his GPS, the cache was located about a quarter mile from the boat launch, accessible only by following a narrow trail through the swamp. Ryan grabbed his backpack, checked his GPS coordinates, and started walking. The trail was barely visible, overgrown, muddy, obviously not maintained. Spanish moss hung so thick from the cypress trees that it blocked out much of the sunlight. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of stagnant water. Ryan followed his GPS deeper into the swamp. After about 15 minutes, the trail ended at a small clearing, a patch of relatively dry ground surrounded by black water. In the center of the clearing was an old wooden post, maybe 3 feet tall, driven into the ground. Attached to the post was a metal box, the geocache container. Ryan felt a surge of satisfaction. After all that difficulty, he'd found it. He approached the post and opened the container. Inside was a leather-bound journal, old and water-stained. Ryan carefully removed it and opened to the first page. The handwriting was elegant but shaky, written in French. Ryan didn't read French, but he photographed the pages with his phone. He could translate them later. As he flipped through the journal, he found entries dated from 1846 and 1847. This wasn't a geocache. This was a historical artifact, possibly valuable, definitely something that should be in a museum. Ryan was about to put the journal back when he noticed something else in the container. A small brass key tarnished with age. Attached to the key was a tag with coordinates written in faded ink, new coordinates, leading to another location. Ryan's geocacher instinct kicked in. This was a multi-cache. You find one location which leads you to the next. He plugged the new coordinates into his GPS. The next location was only 50 yards away, deeper in the swamp. Ryan followed his GPS to the second location. The ground here was wetter, forcing him to step carefully from raised patch to raised patch. The black water between the patches was opaque. He couldn't see how deep it was. The GPS indicated he was standing right on top of the coordinates, but Ryan didn't see anything. No cache container, no marker, nothing but black water and cypress roots. Then he looked down into the water and saw it. Something metallic, barely visible beneath the surface. Ryan knelt down and reached into the water, his hands searching blindly. His fingers closed around metal. He pulled, and a large iron box emerged from the bayou, dripping with mud and algae. The box was old, very old, with ornate engravings on the lid, and it had a keyhole. The brass key from the first cache fit perfectly. Ryan hesitated. This felt wrong. This wasn't a game anymore. This was something real, something that had been hidden in the swamp for a very long time, maybe hidden for a reason. But curiosity won out. Ryan turned the key and opened the box. Inside were human bones, small bones, a child's bones. Ryan dropped the box with a gasp, scrambling backward. The bones spilled out into the black water, disappearing beneath the surface. And as they sank, the water began to change. It started to bubble, then to churn. The entire clearing, every patch of black water, began to roil as if something beneath was waking up. Ryan grabbed his backpack and ran. Behind him, he heard splashing. Something was moving through the water, following him. Multiple somethings, judging by the sounds. He crashed through the swamp, no longer following any trail, just trying to get back to the boat launch. His GPS was useless now. The screen showed nonsensical data, coordinates that didn't exist. Ryan burst out of the tree line and saw the boat launch ahead. His car was 50 yards away. He could make it. But standing between Ryan and his car were 7 figures, pale, dripping wet, dressed in rotted clothing from another century. 7 people who should have been dead for 170 years. Ryan skidded to a stop. The figures didn't move, didn't speak. They just stood there, blocking his path. One of them, a man in the remnants of what had once been fine clothing, stepped forward. Ryan recognized the face from portraits he'd seen online. Henri Beauregard. "You opened the box," Henri said. His voice was hollow, echoing, as if coming from very far away. "I didn't know," Ryan gasped. "I thought it was just a geocache. I'll put it back. Too late," another voice interrupted. Amélie Beauregard stepped forward from the group. "The bones cannot be rebound. The 7th marker has been disturbed." Ryan asked. "There were 37 souls bound to the Beauregard land," Henri explained. "But we couldn't contain them all in one place. 7 were scattered. 7 caches, as you would call them, hidden in the swamp, each containing the remains of one child. As long as they remained hidden, the curse was contained." The water behind Ryan exploded. 30 figures rose from Bayou Noir. Men, women, children, all of them preserved impossibly by whatever dark magic Henri had used. They stood in the black water, staring at Ryan with empty, accusing eyes. "They've been waiting," Amélie said, "waiting for someone to break the seals." "I'm sorry," Ryan said desperately. "Tell me how to fix this." "There's only one way," Henri said. "A new bond must be formed. A new soul must take the place of the one you freed. That's how the curse works." Ryan looked at the 37 figures surrounding him. They were all moving now, slowly closing in from every direction. "No," Ryan whispered. "Please, I have a wife, kids. I can't. Everyone has people they'll leave behind," Amélie said softly. "The children we bound had families too, parents who never knew what happened to them. But Henri needed young souls for his ritual, innocent souls." Ryan asked. Amelie's expression was unreadable. "I thought I was saving us, saving our family. Henri promised immortality. I didn't understand the price until it was too late." The 37 figures were 10 feet away now, 5 feet. Ryan could see their faces clearly. Some decomposed, some impossibly preserved, all of them wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. "Run," Henri said suddenly. "Before they reach you, run, and maybe you can escape." 7 of us did. 7 markers remained hidden. You released one. 6 remain. Ryan didn't wait to hear more. He ran. Ryan made it to his car, but barely. His hands were shaking so badly he could hardly get the key in the ignition. As he drove away from the boat launch, he saw them in his rearview mirror, all 37 figures standing at the edge of the parking area, watching him go. He didn't stop driving until he reached Texas. Even then, he didn't feel safe. Ryan deleted the geocaching app from his phone. He threw away all his GPS equipment. He tried to forget what he'd seen, but 2 weeks after his experience in Bellemont, Ryan received a notification on his phone from the geocaching app he'd deleted. A new cache had been posted. The cache name, Beauregard's Legacy, marker 2 of 7. The description, you freed one, 6 remain. Ryan ignored it, blocked the notifications, tried to move on with his life. But every few months, a new cache appears in the app. Marker 3, marker 4, Marker 5, each one posted with coordinates in or around Bellemont. Ryan knows what they want. They want him to return, to open all 7 markers, to free all 37 souls. And if he does, then the curse will be completely unleashed, and someone will have to take their place, 37 new souls to bind, to trap, to curse for eternity. Ryan hasn't returned to Bellemont. He won't. But he knows that eventually someone else will find those caches. Some other geocacher, eager for a challenge, will follow those coordinates. And when they open the 6th marker, or the 7th, the curse will be complete, the 37 will be free, and the land will demand new prisoners. If you're a geocacher, if you hunt for hidden treasures in remote locations, be careful what you find. Not every cache is a game. Not every treasure is meant to be claimed, and not every location marked on a GPS is somewhere you should go. The 6 remaining markers are still out there, hidden in the swamps around Bellemont, still waiting to be found, still waiting to be opened. Don't be the one who completes the set. Nicole DuPont was 26 years old and ran a popular urban exploration Instagram account called @ForgottenSouth. She specialized in documenting abandoned industrial sites across Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, places that had once been the economic heart of communities but now stood empty and decaying. Nicole's approach was different from other urbex explorers. She didn't just take photos. She researched the history of each location, interviewed former workers, tried to tell the complete story of what these places had been and why they'd been abandoned. In December of 2021, Nicole learned about the old sucrerie in Bellemont, a sugar mill that had operated from 1889 to 1923. The mill had been one of the largest in Louisiana, processing sugar cane from plantations across the region. No details, just that vague phrase. Nicole found that suspicious. Major accidents usually generated extensive documentation, OSHA reports, newspaper articles, lawsuits. But the Bellemont sucrerie accident had been buried, forgotten, as if someone had deliberately erased it from history. She contacted the Bellemont Historical Society and managed to track down a 92-year-old man named Joseph Habert, whose grandfather had worked at the mill. Joseph agreed to talk to her, but only on the condition that she promised never to enter the building itself. "That place is cursed," Joseph told her over the phone. "My grandfather saw what happened. It drove him half mad. He made us promise, made the whole family promise, we'd never go near that mill. It's been 100 years, Miss DuPont." But Nicole had built her reputation on exploring forgotten places. She thanked Joseph for his time, assured him she'd be careful, and scheduled her visit to the old sucrerie for the following weekend. Act 2. First Encounter. The old sucrerie stood on the outskirts of Bellemont, a massive brick structure slowly being consumed by kudzu and Virginia creeper. The building was enormous, 5 stories tall, taking up an entire city block. Broken windows gaped like empty eye sockets. The roof had partially collapsed. Nicole arrived on a Saturday morning with her usual equipment: professional camera, flashlight, gas mask for areas with poor air quality, and a portable charger for her phone. She'd also brought a small first aid kit and a whistle, basic urbex safety. The main entrance was boarded up, but Nicole found a loading dock door that had been forced open by previous explorers. She slipped inside. The interior was breathtaking. Massive cast iron machinery filled the space, crushers, boilers, conveyor systems, all frozen in time. Rust coated everything, creating beautiful patterns of decay. Sunlight streamed through broken windows, illuminating motes of dust hanging in the air. Nicole began photographing, documenting the machinery, the architecture, the way nature was slowly reclaiming the building. Everything seemed normal, a standard urbex exploration. Then she heard it, machinery running. Not all the machinery, just one piece. Somewhere deeper in the building, something metallic was turning, grinding, operating despite the fact that the mill had been abandoned for nearly a century. Nicole's first thought was that other explorers were in the building, perhaps manually operating some old mechanism. But as she moved toward the sound, she realized that wasn't possible. The machinery she was hearing required power, electrical power, and this building had been disconnected from the grid in 1923. Act 3. Escalation. Nicole followed the sound to the mill's central processing area, a cavernous room where sugar cane would have been crushed and boiled. In the center of the room stood the massive crushing mechanism, 2 enormous steel rollers designed to extract juice from sugar cane stalks. and it was running. The rollers turned slowly but steadily, grinding against each other with a sound like bones breaking. Nicole approached cautiously, her camera raised. This was impossible. There was no power source. The machinery should be seized up from a century of rust, but it was moving, the rollers turning in perfect synchronization. That's when Nicole noticed what was between the rollers. Clothing, specifically a piece of fabric, old, stained, dark, caught between the metal cylinders, and as the rollers turned, more fabric emerged, pulled from somewhere inside the machinery. Nicole leaned in for a closer look and immediately wished she hadn't. It wasn't just fabric. There were bones caught in the machinery, human bones, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, all crushed and ground together, pulled through the rollers in an endless cycle. Nicole stumbled backward, her stomach heaving. This was the workplace accident. This was what had been erased from history. Something terrible had happened here, something involving multiple deaths. Bodies fed into the machinery, crushed and processed like sugar cane. Nicole spun around. An old man stood there, elderly, wearing work clothes from another era. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, his skin the color of old parchment. Nicole demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm what's left of Joseph Heber," the figure said. "The grandfather, the one who warned you through my descendant." "You're dead," Nicole whispered. "The body died, yes, but I never left. None of us left." "What debt?" Joseph's ghost, or whatever he was, pointed to the grinding machinery. The Beauregard Plantation used this mill to process their sugar. After Henri Beauregard performed his ritual in 1847, after he bound those 37 souls, the curse spread. The land itself became tainted, and everything built on Beauregard land, everything connected to the Beauregard fortune. Nicole asked. "Built on it. Built with Beauregard money. Built using equipment purchased with Beauregard profits." Joseph moved closer. In 1923, the curse finally claimed its due. The machinery came to life on its own, started running. 47 workers were pulled into the crushers before we could shut it down. But we never could shut it down. Not really. The machinery kept running, kept grinding, kept processing. "But the machinery is still running," Nicole said. "It never stopped. Every soul that was crushed in those rollers became part of the curse, part of the machinery. We're all still here, Miss DuPont, all still working. It's an Act 4, climax." The machinery's grinding intensified. Around Nicole, other figures began to appear, dozens of them. Workers in period clothing, their bodies bearing horrific injuries from being crushed in industrial machinery. They surrounded Nicole, their dead eyes staring at her with expressions of infinite sadness. "You shouldn't have come," Joseph repeated. "Now the machinery knows you're here. Now it's awake." The grinding rollers began to move faster. The entire building seemed to shudder as other machines, silent moments before, suddenly roared to life. Conveyor belts started moving. Boilers began to heat. The entire sugar mill was awakening, all its machinery operating in impossible synchronization. "Run," Joseph said. Nicole didn't need to be told twice. She turned and sprinted toward the exit, but the building itself seemed to be working against her. Conveyor belts blocked her path. Pipes burst, spraying scalding steam. The floor shifted as machinery buried beneath it came to life. Behind her, the 47 dead workers followed, their footsteps echoing in perfect rhythm with the grinding machinery. Nicole reached the loading dock door she'd entered through, but it had sealed shut. Rusted bolts that had been loose minutes before were now fused solid. She was trapped. The machinery was all around her now, every piece operating at full capacity. The sound was deafening, overwhelming, and worst of all, the machinery was moving, physically moving, shifting positions, surrounding Nicole, herding her back toward the central processing area, back toward the crushing rollers. Nicole screamed, "Please, I didn't know." "None of them knew," Joseph's voice echoed through the machinery's roar. "We didn't know either, but ignorance doesn't protect you from a curse." Nicole saw a window, high up on the second floor, but reachable if she could climb the machinery. She jumped onto a conveyor belt, using it like a ladder, pulling herself up toward the window. The machinery fought back, gears shifted, belts changed direction. Something grabbed her ankle, a mechanical arm that shouldn't have been able to move. Nicole kicked free and kept climbing. She reached the window and smashed through it with her flashlight, ignoring the glass cutting her arms. She climbed through and dropped 15 feet to the ground outside, landing hard but alive. Act 5. Resolution and Aftermath. Nicole limped to her car and drove away from the old sucrery, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. When she looked back in her rearview mirror, she saw them, 47 figures standing in the broken windows of the mill watching her leave. She didn't stop driving until she reached Mississippi. Nicole deleted every photo she'd taken in the mill, shut down her Instagram account, stopped urban exploration entirely. She works in a library now, a safe, quiet job with no adventures and no risks. But 6 months after her experience at the old sucrery, Nicole began having nightmares. In the dreams, she's back in the mill, back in the central processing area, and she's being pulled toward the crushing rollers, unable to stop herself, while 47 dead workers watch in silence. And every morning, Nicole wakes up with rust on her hands, rust that wasn't there when she went to sleep, rust that smells like old blood and sugar. She knows what it means. The machinery marked her, claimed a piece of her, and one day the nightmares won't be nightmares anymore. One day she'll wake up in the mill for real, and the crushing rollers will be waiting. If you're an urban explorer, if you seek out abandoned industrial sites for their haunting beauty, remember this: some places are abandoned for a reason. Some machinery should never be restarted, and some buildings hold memories that don't want to be disturbed. The old sucrery still stands in Bellemont. The machinery still runs, grinding and crushing nothing and everything, powered by a curse that will never end. The 47 workers are still there, still trapped, still waiting. Don't be the next person to join them. Dr. Elena Vasquez was 41 years old and had been studying migratory bird patterns for the Audubon Society for over 15 years. She was a respected ornithologist with a PhD from Cornell, published research on endangered species, and a reputation for meticulous fieldwork that took her to remote locations across North America. In April of 2022, Elena's research brought her to Louisiana to document the spring migration of the prothonotary warbler, a small golden songbird that nested in the state's cypress swamps. Her goal was to band and track individual birds, studying their routes and breeding behaviors. A local birding forum recommended the Beauregard Forest Trail, a 3-mile loop through old-growth forest on the outskirts of Bellemont. The trail cut through what had once been part of the Beauregard Plantation lands, now converted to a nature preserve in 1987. What those posts didn't mention was why foot traffic was minimal, or why the nature preserve had been closed twice, once in 1995 after a hiker disappeared, and again in 2008 after 3 separate visitors reported disorienting experiences that left them lost for hours despite the trail being clearly marked. Elena arrived at the trailhead at dawn, the optimal time for birding. The parking area was empty except for a weathered sign, Beauregard Nature Preserve, Est. She shouldered her equipment, binoculars, camera with telephoto lens, audio recorder for capturing bird calls, GPS unit, field notebook, and started walking. The forest was immediately impressive. Towering live oaks formed a dense canopy overhead, their branches draped in Spanish moss that swayed in the morning breeze. Cypress knees jutted from marshy areas beside the trail. The air was thick with humidity and the rich smell of decaying vegetation. And the birds were everywhere. Elena heard dozens of species within the first 100 yards: Caroline chickadees, tufted titmice, blue-gray gnatcatchers, and yes, the distinctive sweet, sweet, sweet call of prothonotary warblers. She was in ornithologist heaven. Elena spent the morning moving slowly along the trail, stopping frequently to observe and photograph birds. She successfully banded 3 prothonotary warblers, logging their data in her field notebook. Everything was going perfectly. Then around 11 a.m., Elena noticed something unusual. The bird calls had stopped, not gradually, suddenly. One moment, the forest was alive with sound. The next, complete silence. Every experienced birder knows what this means. A predator is nearby. When songbirds go quiet, it's because a hawk, owl, or snake is hunting in the area. Elena looked up, scanning the canopy for raptors. That's when she saw the woman. Standing approximately 30 yards down the trail was a woman in a white dress. She stood perfectly still, facing away from Elena, her long dark hair hanging loose down her back. Elena's first thought was that another visitor was on the trail. Though the woman's clothing was strange, the dress looked old-fashioned, like something from a historical reenactment, and she was barefoot despite the muddy, rough trail. Elena called out. The woman didn't respond, didn't move. Elena walked closer, concerned now. "Miss?" The woman turned around. Elena's breath caught. The woman's face was beautiful but wrong. Her skin was too pale, almost translucent. Her eyes were completely black. No whites, no iris, just pools of darkness. And when she smiled, her mouth opened too wide, revealing too many teeth. The woman said. Her voice echoed strangely, as if coming from multiple directions at once. Elena whispered, her hand instinctively moving to the GPS unit clipped to her belt. The birds, they're not singing anymore. Elena took a step backward. I think... You came to watch the birds, the woman continued, still smiling that impossible smile. But the birds came to watch you. We all watch. We all wait. The woman's form began to flicker, like a projection losing signal. One moment solid, the next translucent, then solid again. And behind her, Elena could now see other figures, dozens of them, standing among the trees, all wearing clothing from another century, all staring at Elena with those terrible black eyes. Elena turned and ran. Behind her, she heard laughter, not human laughter, but something that mimicked the sound without understanding it. And beneath the laughter, a new sound, birds calling, but not normal bird calls. These were distorted, wrong, like recordings played backward. Elena ran down the trail, her equipment bouncing against her body. She checked her GPS. The screen showed her position, but the trail that should have been there wasn't displayed. According to the GPS, she was running through an open field, not a forest. The trail itself had changed. The packed dirt path she'd walked that morning was now overgrown, as if decades of vegetation had reclaimed it. Trees that hadn't been there before now blocked her way, forcing her to detour deeper into the forest. Elena pulled out her phone. No signal, which wasn't surprising in the dense forest. But more disturbing was her compass app. The needle was spinning wildly, unable to find magnetic north. The bird calls intensified. Elena looked up and saw them. Hundreds of birds perched in the trees overhead. Crows, vultures, warblers, woodpeckers, species that should never flock together, all sitting in unnatural silence, all staring down at her. Then they began to fall, not flying, falling, dead birds dropping from the branches like rain. They hit the ground around Elena with soft, sickening thuds. Within seconds, dozens of small bodies littered the trail. Elena stumbled through the carpet of dead birds, trying not to step on them, her mind reeling. This wasn't possible. Birds didn't just die en masse like this. Elena stopped. The woman in white stood blocking the trail again, but now she wasn't alone. The 37 figures surrounded Elena, forming a circle, men, women, children, all wearing the simple clothing of enslaved workers from the 1840s, all with those black, empty eyes. Henri Beauregard brought us here, the woman said, bound us to this land. 37 souls trapped forever. We became part of the forest, part of the earth. I don't understand, Elena gasped. You study birds, another figure said, a man's voice, old and tired. You track their movements. You watch them live and die. But what watches you, Dr. Brr? Elena's blood went cold. We know everyone who enters our land, the woman replied. We watch them all. Some we let leave. Some... The circle of figures began to close in. Elena looked for gaps, for any way to break through, but they moved in perfect synchronization, tightening the circle. The dead birds on the ground began to move. Not alive. They were definitely dead, but moving nonetheless. Their wings twitched. Their heads turned to face Elena. Their beaks opened and closed, as if trying to speak. And then they did speak, all of them at once, their dead mouths forming words in a chorus of rasping, inhuman voices. Stay, stay, stay. Become part of the land. Stay, stay. Elena screamed and charged at the circle, trying to break through between two figures. Her shoulder hit the woman in white, but instead of solid flesh, Elena passed through something cold and insubstantial, like plunging into icy water. She emerged on the other side, gasping, her entire body numb with cold. She kept running, no longer following any trail, just fleeing deeper into the forest. Behind her, the voices called out, You can't leave. No one leaves. The land remembers. Elena crashed through underbrush, branches tearing at her clothes and skin. Her professional equipment fell away, binoculars knocked off by a branch, camera torn from her neck, field notebook lost in the mud. She didn't care. She just needed to escape. The forest seemed to go on forever. Elena should have reached the boundary by now. A road, a building, something. But there was only more forest, deeper and darker. the trees pressing closer together until she could barely squeeze between them. And everywhere she looked, those figures watched, standing behind trees, emerging from the shadows, always just visible in her peripheral vision, disappearing when she looked directly at them. Elena's foot caught on a cypress root and she fell hard, sliding down an embankment into a shallow creek. The cold water shocked her system, but it also cleared her mind. She looked around, trying to orient herself. That's when she saw it, a worn trail marker, partially hidden by vegetation. She scrambled up the bank and found a path, not the main trail, but a narrow side trail marked with faded orange paint. Elena followed the markers, moving as quickly as she dared. The forest began to thin. Light appeared ahead, real sunlight, not the dim green glow that had surrounded her. She burst out of the tree line into the parking area. Her car sat exactly where she'd left it. Elena fumbled with her keys, got inside, and locked all the doors. Elena sat in her car for 10 minutes, her hands shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked at the forest behind her. From here, it looked completely normal, beautiful even, just trees and Spanish moss and morning light. She checked her equipment. Most of it was gone, lost in the forest, but her audio recorder was still clipped to her belt, running the entire time. Elena played back the recording. For the first hour, everything was normal. Bird calls, her own voice making observations, the crunch of her footsteps on the trail. Then the silence began, followed by voices, dozens of voices, all speaking at once in a language Elena didn't recognize, and beneath the voices, that distorted bird song. And at times, stamp 1143, clear as day, a woman's voice. Dr. Elena Vasquez, we know you, we see you. Elena deleted the recording immediately. She drove away from Bellemont and never returned. But 6 weeks later, Elena began finding dead birds on her doorstep. 1 or 2 at first, then more. Always birds she'd been studying, prothonotory warblers specifically, birds that should have been in Louisiana, not at her home in Massachusetts. She found them arranged in patterns, circles, spirals. Elena stopped doing field work. She took a desk job at the Audubon Society, analyzing data collected by other researchers. She moved twice, trying to escape whatever was following her. But the birds keep coming, dead on her doorstep, dead on her car, dead inside her apartment despite locked doors and windows. And sometimes when Elena looks out her window at night, she sees them, the 37 figures standing among the trees across the street watching her building, always watching, always waiting. She knows what they want. They want her to return to Bellemont, to the forest, to the land that claims everyone who disturbs it. Elena hasn't returned, not yet. But she knows she will, eventually, because the land is patient, and the dead have all the time in the world. If you're a birder, if you study wildlife in remote locations, remember this. When the birds go silent, they're not hiding from a predator. They're hiding from something worse. And if you stay too long in those silent places, you'll discover what they already know. Some forests watch back. Marcus Webb was 35 years old and hosted one of the fastest-growing true crime podcasts in the country, Forgotten Cases, with over 2 million downloads per episode. His specialty was cold cases and unsolved disappearances in small American towns. He didn't just report the facts. He investigated, interviewed witnesses, uncovered new evidence. In June of 2023, Marcus began researching Bellemont, Louisiana for a special series. The town's history of disappearances was fascinating. 43 documented cases since 1847, all unsolved, all sharing strange characteristics. No bodies, no evidence, just people vanishing from specific locations. Marcus spent 3 weeks preparing. He reviewed historical records, police reports, newspaper archives. He contacted families of the disappeared. He reached out to locals willing to talk. Most weren't willing. Out of 37 emails sent, only 3 people agreed to speak with him, and all 3 gave the same warning. Don't come at night. Don't visit the Beauregard locations. Marcus appreciated the warnings, but he'd investigated dozens of cursed towns. He'd heard it all before. Local superstitions, urban legends, stories designed to keep outsiders away. His job was to find the truth beneath the folklore. He booked a room at the Bellemont Inn for 5 days in late June and drove down from Atlanta with his equipment: professional audio recorder, backup recorder, video camera, laptop, and boxes of printed research materials. Marcus arrived on a Monday afternoon. The town was exactly as he'd imagined. Charming decay, beautiful old architecture, Spanish moss everywhere. He checked into his room, set up his equipment, and prepared for his first interview. What Marcus didn't know was that by coming to Bellemont with the explicit intention of exposing its secrets, he'd already drawn attention. The kind of attention that had ended 42 investigations before his. Marcus's first interview was with Margaret Landry, an 84-year-old woman whose brother had disappeared near the Beauregard ruins in 1971. They met at Margaret's home, a beautiful Victorian house on the edge of town. Marcus set up his recording equipment and began the interview. Margaret was lucid, detailed, emotional. She described how her brother Paul had been an amateur historian, fascinated by the Beauregard Plantation story. He'd gone to photograph the ruins one evening and never returned. His car was found at the site, keys in the ignition, camera on the front seat. But Paul was gone. Marcus asked. They investigated, Margaret said. Found nothing. They called it a voluntary disappearance, said Paul must have walked away from his life. But Paul wouldn't do that. He had a wife, 2 children. He loved them. Something? Margaret's expression darkened. Mr. Webb, I've lived in Bellemont my entire life. I know what this town is. What happened to my brother wasn't a crime. It was a claiming. After the interview, Marcus drove to the Beauregard ruins to film establishing shots for his podcast video content. The site was exactly as described in his research. Overgrown foundation, broken columns, ancient live oaks. Marcus set up his camera on a tripod and recorded a stand-up introduction. I'm standing at the Beauregard Plantation ruins, where in 1847, 37 people vanished without a trace. Since then, 15 more disappearances have been documented at this exact location. Tonight, I'm going to... His camera went dead. Battery drained from full charge to 0 in seconds. Marcus checked his backup recorder, also dead. His phone, dead. He looked around. The sun was setting, and the ruins looked different in the fading light. Darker. The shadows between the broken walls seemed too deep, too solid. He spun around. A man stood there, elderly, wearing work clothes from another era. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. I'm sorry, I didn't see you, Marcus said. I'm a journalist. I'm researching. I know why you're here, the man interrupted. 7th fool who thought they could expose the truth. Marcus felt a chill despite the humid Louisiana evening. The land knows, the man said, and then he was gone, not walked away, just gone, as if he'd never been there. Marcus drove back to the inn, his mind racing. He tried to rationalize what he'd seen, probably a local trying to scare him off. The dead equipment was explainable, batteries could fail. The man disappearing was a trick of the light and Marcus's own spooked imagination. He spent the evening reviewing his research and planning the next day's interviews. Around 11 p.m., Marcus decided to transcribe the audio from Margaret Landry's interview. He plugged in his recorder and hit play. Margaret's voice came through clearly at first, describing her brother's disappearance. But underneath her voice, Marcus heard something else. Whispers, dozens of voices, all speaking at once, too quiet to make out individual words. Marcus increased the volume and isolated the frequency. The whispers became clearer. They were speaking in French, and they were saying the same thing over and over. Il sait trop. He knows too much. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He played through more of the recording. The whispers were present throughout the entire interview, growing louder toward the end, and at times stamped 4732. Right after Marcus asked about police investigations, a new voice appeared. Male, cold, speaking in perfect English. Marcus Webb. Marcus yanked the headphones off. This was impossible. He'd been alone with Margaret. No one else was in the room. These voices couldn't be on the recording. But they were. Marcus checked his backup recorder, the one that had died at the Beauregard ruins. It had somehow turned itself back on, and it was recording. He played back the most recent file. It was Marcus's own voice, but he hadn't recorded this. The voice was saying, Day 1 in Bellemont. I've made contact with the source. The 37 are real. The curse is real. I'm not leaving until I understand everything. Marcus had never said those words, never thought them, but there they were in his voice, recorded on his equipment. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Stop investigating. Leave Bellemont tonight. Marcus immediately tried to call the number. Disconnected. He tried to trace it. Impossible. And then his laptop screen flickered. Files began opening on their own. His research documents, police reports, photographs. But the images weren't what Marcus had saved. The photos of the Beauregard ruins now showed figures standing in the background, dozens of pale, hollow-eyed figures that hadn't been visible when Marcus took the shots. And in every single photo, one figure stood at the center, a woman in a white dress, staring directly at the camera, at Marcus. Marcus slammed the laptop shut and grabbed his car keys. He was leaving, right now. He'd come back with better equipment, maybe a crew, definitely not alone. But when Marcus opened the door to his hotel room, he wasn't looking at the hallway. He was looking at the ruins, the Beauregard ruins, as if the door had opened directly onto the property miles away. Marcus stepped back and closed the door, counted to 5, opened it again, still the ruins. "This isn't real," Marcus said aloud. "This is psychological." A woman's voice asked. The woman in white stood in the doorway, the same woman from the photographs. Up close, Marcus could see that she was beautiful but wrong. Her skin too pale, her eyes completely black, her smile too wide. Marcus whispered, "Amélie Beauregard," she said, "and you've been asking questions about my family, about what happened here. You want the truth, Mr. Webb?" The hotel room dissolved. Marcus found himself standing in a circle of 37 figures, the enslaved workers exactly as they'd looked in 1847. They surrounded him, their faces expressionless, their eyes empty, and in the center stood Henri Beauregard, looking exactly as he did in historical portraits Marcus had studied. "I tried to make us immortal," Henri said, his voice hollow and distant. "I performed the ritual, bound their souls to the land, but the magic, it went wrong. Instead of freeing us from death, it trapped us, all of us." "This is my land," Amélie said, stepping forward. "My curse. Henri tried to enslave them for eternity, so I bound Henri as well. All 37 souls forever chained to this place. They cannot leave. They cannot rest. All they can do is—" Marcus asked. "For others to join them," Amélie replied. "The curse must grow. Every few years the land claims someone new, someone who comes too close." Marcus looked around wildly. "I'm leaving, right now. I'll never come back. I'll destroy all my research. Please." Amélie studied him for a long moment. "You're a journalist, Mr. Webb. You tell stories, you expose truth. If I let you leave—" Marcus didn't answer. They both knew he wouldn't, couldn't. His entire career was built on exposing hidden truths. "That's what I thought," Amélie said sadly. "You're just like the others, the historians, the researchers, the investigators. All of them thought they could tell our story." The 37 figures began to close in. Marcus woke up in his car, parked outside the Bellemont Inn. It was dawn. He had no memory of how he'd gotten there. He immediately started the engine and drove. He didn't stop until he was 3 states away. Once home, Marcus examined his equipment. Every recording was corrupted. Every file was gone. His research materials had vanished from his laptop, even the backed-up versions stored in the cloud. It was as if his investigation had never happened. Marcus tried to move on. He produced episodes about other cases, but 6 months later, his podcast was quietly canceled. Marcus found out why when he tried to edit his audio files. Every recording from every case, not just Bellemont, now contained the same background noise, whispers in French. And underneath the whispers, a woman's voice saying his name, "Marcus Webb, Marcus Webb, come back, tell our story." The curse had followed him home, infected his work, destroyed his career. Marcus received one final message delivered by postal mail with no return address. Inside was a photograph of him standing at the Beauregard ruins during his investigation. But in the photo, Marcus wasn't alone. The 37 figures surrounded him, and standing directly behind Marcus, her hand on his shoulder, was Amélie Beauregard. On the back of the photo, written in elegant handwriting, "You wanted our story, now you're part of it." Marcus hasn't returned to Bellemont, but he knows he will, eventually, because journalists can't leave stories unfinished, and the Beauregard story will never be finished until it claims him completely. If you're an investigative journalist, if you dig into cold cases and unexplained disappearances, remember this: some stories don't want to be told, some truths should stay buried, and some places, well, keep their secrets by keeping the people who try to expose them. The 43rd disappearance in Bellemont's history hasn't happened yet, but Marcus Webb is still out there, still hearing the whispers, still being called back. He'll be 43 soon enough. 7 stories, 7 witnesses, 1 cursed town. If you're from Bellemont, Louisiana, or you've ever visited, I want you to know something. These accounts were submitted to us anonymously. We've changed some names to protect the survivors, but the locations, those are real. The Beauregard ruins, St. Catherine's Cemetery, the old Sucrery, the Forest Trail, all real. The warnings, those are very, very real. Marcus Webb still hears whispers in every recording he makes. Elena Vasquez still finds dead birds on her doorstep. Nicole DuPont still has nightmares about the sugar mill. Ryan McCarthy still receives notifications about geocaches he'll never seek. Amanda Reeves sees faces in every photograph. Dr. Michael Torres wakes up speaking French. And Jessica Chen knows that eventually the land will call her back. They've never met, but they all know the same truth now. Bellemont, Louisiana has secrets, debts that were never paid, curses that were never broken, and those secrets don't like being disturbed. If you found yourself holding your breath during any of these stories, if you felt that familiar chill creep up your spine, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, because next week we're traveling to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where the Mothman isn't just a legend, and the Silver Bridge collapse might not have been an accident. Drop a comment if you've ever experienced something paranormal while pursuing your hobbies, or better yet, if you're from Bellemont, tell us, what warnings did we miss? What stories are we not hearing? To everyone listening tonight, stay safe, stay smart, and if the locals tell you not to go somewhere, if they give you that look, that knowing look, listen to them. They know something you don't. This has been Bare Facts, where every story is true and every warning is earned. Until next time, stay connected, stay cautious, and keep your lights on. And remember, some debts are never paid. They just get passed on. Sweet dreams, Bellemont.